Hey everyone, and welcome. This is Jack Butler, and I'm excited to be here today talking with Jonathon Aslay, who is a very successful YouTuber. He's got a great channel. You should check it out. I'll link it beneath the video. And we are here talking about why women accept casual when they are looking for committed. So Jonathon, welcome to the channel.
Well, I'm so grateful that you reached out to me. I want you to know I followed your work as well, and
yes,
and I really appreciate your personal development take in how you approach, whether it's dating, mating, or relating, or just individual growth. And so I want you to know you were on my radar. So when you reached out, I'm like, oh, I'm excited.
Yes. No, it's good. I appreciate that. Yeah. So one of the reasons I was keen to get you on the channel is that you have done a lot with working with women in dating over 40.
Yes.
So if anyone's in that category and listening, I want you to pay particular attention. So we're going to dialogue here a bit. So let's just dive in, because you were saying some stuff before we got on here that I thought was really interesting.
Sure.
So what's your take on this question? Why are women accepting casual when they're really wanting commitment?
Well, I'm going to go down a rabbit hole here for everyone that's watching. So just bear with me for a second. And just to give some context,
let's do it.
After turning 40 and going through a divorce about a decade and a half ago, I found myself in the dating marketplace. And it was a completely different world, because in my generation, there was no internet. We met people organically, and now that there's the internet, and I thought, oh, what a great way to meet someone. You just plug in exactly what you want and someone would magically appear. And after one, and I'd meet a really nice gal. We'd have a great date, but something wasn't right. I'd meet another one, nice gal, great date. Another one, something wasn't right. Quite frankly, I had over 100 internet dates in my first year.
In a year.
In a year. I literally was 2 a week. Well, and I had even a short-lived relationship in there. What I found, the problem wasn't the women, the problem was me. So I actually began doing work, under individual work, personal development, self-help, spiritual work, to get a sense of what am I doing wrong? And I don't like even characterizing the word wrong, but ineffective. And what was interesting was I was actually communicating with so many women. They were asking my advice about men, dating, relationships, their profile, that I switched professions from the insurance field to helping give advice on just to improve dating profiles.
Yeah.
And I grew to such a point where I've actually established, I'm actually, I'm in the second tier of the top tier people that are in this industry, if you will. And I mean that there are people more successful than me, but I'm quite successful. What I recognized was when I was in my 20s, and I'm answering the question now, when I was in my 20s and 30s, I was very programmed, and I'm of that baby boom Gen X period. I'm right at the cusp of that age bracket. My programming was go to college, get a job, meet a gal, get married, buy a house, start a family. That was my programming. So when I was in my 20s, I was on the hunt for a wife.
Yeah.
Okay. And all my friends were on the hunt for a wife, because we had this programming about family.
Yep.
Then at 40, I went through a divorce, and I was a train wreck for easily 5 years. I was a disaster, emotionally speaking. And yet I craved companionship. I craved connection, and I craved sex. What was missing was commitment.
Yeah.
2 reasons. A, I was gun shy to commitment.
Of course.
But B, I didn't know what commitment looked like, because the demographic I was dating, and roughly, I say this is anecdotal, but roughly 75% of people over 45 years old are divorced.
Yeah.
And divorce comes with it an emotional entanglement. It's an unraveling of the tapestry of a life you thought you were going to build.
Yeah.
And now it's like it's frayed. So what commitment looks like, in particularly for those of us in 40, divorce, maybe children or whatnot, is ambiguous at best.
Yeah.
Now we think of monogamy and exclusivity as forms of commitment.
Yeah.
But after that, you can break up with anyone, someone at any given time. There isn't really any deep roots of commitment. And what men in particular is they don't have the blueprint of what commitment looks like after getting married, after going through a divorce. And what I mean to say is short of marriage again. And if you're gun shy of marriage again,
yeah.
Is commitment living together? Is commitment sharing finances together?
Yeah.
And so now coming back to your question, why are women accepting casual to commitment? It's because we've been indoctrinated in believing that chemistry equals relationship success. Lust and limerence, that happens in the early stage. Oh my God, we lust for each other.
Romantic infatuation.
Yeah. And yet, why do women find themselves 6 weeks later after, they've been intimate with someone, all of a sudden he says, I'm not ready for a relationship? Well, it's because men, right off the bat, a significant percentage aren't committed to the idea of commitment.
Did you say they aren't committed to the idea of commitment?
They are not committed to the idea of commitment.
They're not looking for it.
Yeah. Now, they might say the words, I'm seeking a relationship. But remember I said earlier, companionship, connection, and sex? The fourth leg, and I really should say, if I want to keep them all C's, companionship, commitment, and coupling, okay?
Okay. The
fourth C that's missing is commitment. And because they don't know what it looks like for them.
You're saying they don't know what the deeper purpose is if there's not the purpose of kind of creating family, children together, and there's maybe not the purpose of marrying or marrying again. Interesting. So wait, so you're actually saying in a way that the issue, as I'm hearing it so far, is a little bit more on the side of men.
Oh, absolutely. And so it's the men in particular, not that men are, we've been indoctrinated in a traditional expectation that men are the leaders of the relationship. Because traditionally speaking, men have been the provider protectors, and they say, I'm going to take you in my home, I'm going to protect you, and I'm going to provide for you. Okay. Now you've got this group of men, they're like, I don't know if I want to be provider protector. I just went through a nasty divorce. I've got to pay alimony. I've got this person that's beating down my neck. And for some men, they have contentious relationships with their ex. That idea of provider protector, and a lot of people, and a lot of people in our realm, particularly, I believe, female coaches overemphasize this without understanding, because I'm a man. I went through a divorce. The last thing I wanted to be, and I went through a contentious divorce, the last thing I wanted to be was a provider protector for someone. But everybody says, but that's biological. Well, guess what? Biology was for the cavemen for 30 years, because that's about as old as a caveman ever got. There's no cavemen that made it to age 60 and went through divorce, and alimony, and child support, and visitation rights, and and there was no.
So just on that specifically, do you think anything has changed, sort of substantively since the 70s and 80s? Because there was also a decent divorce rate happening then. The thing that you mentioned that's different is sort of online. But do you think this was the same situation that people were dealing with 40 years ago, or do you think something is unique to this time?
So the proliferation of divorce coincides with a woman's capacity to no longer be dependent upon a man to support herself. Throughout history, when you are dependent, you might have compromised yourself to stay with a person that might be miserable, but you had no choice to leave. So roughly when women were had the fortune to be able to support themselves financially, it allowed them to exit relationships outside of dependency.
Yeah.
Now, so that's number one. Number two, I think the advent of birth control has also shifted the narrative, because now sex can be done on a casual level and no longer on a committed level.
Yeah.
So comes back to our title, casual versus committed. Women are accepting casual relationships because there's this belief that it's going to turn committed at some point in the future. And in many cases, if I said earlier, if a man isn't committed to the idea of commitment, he just wants casual, You know, he might say the words, I want a relationship, but the word relationship can have multiple meanings to multiple different people.
Sure.
What does it mean?
Yeah.
And
it's
now
probably
even the
what we
word
call an essentially contested concept, like until you define it.
Yeah. And so, you know,
not
a
completely
woman's
clear.
idea of relationship might look something like this. And the guy's like, yeah, I just want to see you at my beck and call. And that space in between is called drama, by the way, because the desire of this. Yeah. So
yeah. So wait. So what I'm hearing is actually that maybe because the two things that you pointed to there about proliferation of divorce rates and birth control, again, they have been around for quite a number of decades, and so I'm wondering if this is actually something that people have been dealing with for a number of decades, but maybe actually people want more or different on both sides of the equation from what is this relationship going to be if it's not about creating a family together, or we already have that, or I don't want it, or I'm not capable of it, or whatever that's the piece is there. What do you think is the best way for a woman to approach articulating what she's actually looking for in a relationship beyond just maybe saying commitment? Like, what would be the best pitch authentically to a guy to say, this is why maybe we want to have a committed relationship?
So I think it's important, and I want to address that question. I mean, and at the same time, there was one other piece I didn't include prior, and I want to add that. So we said women's capacity to take care of themselves began to increase. We have birth control, and again, since the 70s, you know, and I'm saying it's a 50-year evolution here. What's changed in the last 20 years is this thing, and the ease of access to people who wouldn't otherwise be in your
social
visual circle. I mean, not your social circle, or actually I say it, your visual circle, because everything was proximity based. Now at a click of a finger, you know, a guy can be communicating with, he lives in Los Angeles, can communicate with someone in Chicago and begin a interlude and go and have, you know, meet them, have sex, and then say, oh, I'm not ready for a relationship. So I just wanted to add that piece that's changed so much so in the last 20 years. And really, it's the last 5 years of swipe dating that has bastardized the mating process, okay, because of this belief of the paradox of choice. In other words, we have this belief that we have so many choices, and that's what's changed in the last 5 years. Now, to come back to your question, one of the things I teach in my private coaching is something I call radical honesty, pre-qualifying your prospect. It's really about laying your cards on the table very early on before you ever get attached to another human being. And the new term for this is called hardballing. Hardballing is like, look, you know what? This is what I want. If you're not on the same page as me, then, you know, there's no need to even take this any further. And that's now, this is going to scare off 90% of men. But these are the 90% that they're not committed to the idea of commitment. You know, I want to get your take on something. Is it okay if I share with you and your audience, something I call the dating vows? And it's something to address early on in the dating process. I'm going to read it. It goes like this. Have you ever heard the saying, women are the gatekeepers of sex and men are the gatekeepers of commitment? And nowadays, sex could be given without any commitment. And I mean, yeah, there might be the agreement of monogamy and exclusivity, but that's still a weak form of commitment. So the dating vow before sex states the following. Each person agrees to the following. I agree to explore the process of getting to know you with the intent to declare something serious within the next 3 to 6 months. You're both sharing this. I agree to be monogamous sexually while we have regular sex together. I agree to not actively seek to meet and date others while we're in the dating process, including taking down my dating profile. I agree to speak up if this isn't working for me versus pulling back, ghosting, or disappearing. And I agree to invest regular time in the process to get to know you, which looks like we spend 3 or 4 days and nights a week together doing shared activities, hobbies, mutual interests, spending time with family and friends, teamwork in both our personal and professional life. So
I like it.
My clients have been adopting this, and it scares 90% of men.
When are they introducing it into the conversation?
very early, ideally they want to do it before there's sex, or certainly if there's going to be regular sex, but I invite them to do it prior to them giving their heart to a man.
Yeah.
Because I'm not here to say, each woman can handle sex differently, although women have a propensity to get attached once there's sex. I mean, we've talked about oxytocin, not you and I haven't talked about, but I mean, everyone who follows us, we've heard heard about oxytocin, estrogen, all those sorts of things. It's really tricky. So I invite deeper conversations on the first phone call.
Yeah.
Like, you got nothing to lose. You're not attached to a person. If they go, oh, this feels like an interview, I'm like, yeah, it is. We should be interrogating people. I say this, I don't say this cavalierly. Listen, just like a detective interviewing a suspect for murder, you have to navigate, and I'm being candid here.
Yeah.
There's a methodology to do this. This is what I teach in my coaching, but there's a methodology to evoke it without it seeming like an interrogation. But we don't, at our age, for those of us in midlife, and I'm not that far, I'm in, over 55, the days in front of us are shorter than the days behind us. We don't have time to mess around when you're over 40.
Yeah. So I was just making maybe the distinction between, here's what I'm looking for, right? I'm looking for, a real relationship or a committed relationship, which is different than what I love what you talked about with the dating vows. Yeah. That's like a we thing, isn't it? Right. That's a sort of like, hey, we are both. So this is not, it's personal. It's not impersonal. Like, hey, I'm looking for a committed relationship. It's personal to you. Like, we are going to agree to basically date exclusively. And if we want to, here are a set of agreements that just give some substance to what that actually looks like.
Yeah. And, so the question becomes establishing what your standard is. So my standard was before I met my beloved, and there's a picture of her right there. Mm-hmm. And we met on a dating site. It happened to be even long distance, which I'm not a big proponent of long distance, but we established very early on what our standard was. So my standard at a minimum was to spend 3 or 4 days and nights a week together, doing shared activities, hobbies, mutual interests, spending time with family and friends, traveling together, teamwork, building skills, both in our personal and our professional life, intimacy, both physical and emotional intimacy that leads to either moving in together or getting married. That was my standard. That was my box. We had to work around that box because of the distance, but her lifestyle blended so well with mine that within 90 days, we actually chose within a 90-day period to move in together, which occurred 5 months after we first met. Let me just quickly give you a backstory. But we'd been talking on and off for a year, so it wasn't a total stranger.
Okay. Yeah.
But we were like, look, if this is going to work, and she had the flexibility of moving, and she had children who lives here. We're like, if this is going to work, we got to either she has to live here or move in together. We were fully committed to taking the risk, both a financial risk and because we thought that this was worth it. Most people these days, I'm going to be candid with you, Jack. I think dating today is just a strung out version of friends with benefits with some minor agreement to monogamy and exclusivity, and I say it almost not cavalierly. I say it almost from a caustic perspective. Is there's really no commitment, and yet remember I said women are the gatekeepers of sex and men are the gatekeepers of commitment. A guy doesn't have to give much commitment to get laid on a regular basis.
So let's imagine for a moment that I know your audience is predominantly women, but let's just say that you were working with a guy and you were trying to enroll him in why a committed relationship might be good for him, right? Not just because she wants to have a committed relationship, but sort of like in an internally owned, like, I also want this, I'm in the box that you're talking about. I'm ready to be in a committed relationship. Just to kind of get into the male psychology of that, what do you think is most in that for guys?
A great question. So I believe the man who is emotionally grown up, has emotional maturity. In other words, he's not overly affected by childhood wounds and traumas, and he's not overly affected by adult traumas. And the life, like the foundation of his life is solid. Let me give you an example. He's not dealing with a contentious divorce. He's not dealing with children issues. He's not dealing with professional issues, and he's not dealing with very many health issues. I'm saying for the most part. I mean, we all have little bits in here, but if the ground underneath you doesn't feel solid, then oftentimes all you're interested is in casual relationship. But if you're a guy who is, he's got his shit together, so to speak, and I don't mean he's wealthy or anything like that, but just he's not overly dealing with problems, okay? And he's attracted to the woman he's talking with. He's physically attracted to her. The incentive is, look, dating is a fucking bitch. Excuse my F word here. It's just, I mean, look do you really want to be swiping all day long? I mean, I know I reached a saturation point 4 years ago, before I met my beloved. I reached this is just, it's exhausting to constantly. Now, when I said emotionally healthy, it's also, you're not looking for the bigger, better deal all the time. We have a lot of,
sobriety
men and who are players, and they're constantly seeking that next thrill. So dating becomes a serial component for them because they just expect the next high. Yeah, you use the term sobriety. I'm self-control to some degree is about going, look, I don't want to be on this merry-go-round. So that's the incentive, one. And number two, I'm a woman who wants to co-create. Are you a man who wants to co-create? Because if you do, and by the way, my clientele is using this hardballing technique, and it's actually a lot of men are going, oh my God, this makes my job so much easier. You've already laid it out for me. I don't have to, it's already there. If they buy into it, they're like, God, you just made it easy for me.
Yeah, the alignment's easier. So just to dimensionalize that, let's say someone's hearing that and they're like, oh, I like the idea of a co-creative partnership.
Yeah.
Right? Man or woman, or however you identify.
Yeah.
What do you think are some of the elements of a co-creative partnership? Like, how would someone know that they're in one, or what is the possibility of that?
So I happen to be a big fan of the work of the Gottmans, the Gottman Institute, John and Julie Gottman in particular, and they wrote a book called 8 Dates. Now, what this is 8 separate conversations to have with someone to determine if you're on the same page, starting with trust and commitment being the first chapter. And so, and the second chapter is about what's calling agreeing to disagree, learning conflict resolution skills. Yeah. So there's a blueprint that exists, both in their book, 8 Dates, and the 7 Principles for Making a Marriage Successful. What I mean to say is, these are people that thought, this is a guy who was much like, oh, can I rewind for a second and just share something? I'll come back to Gottman in a second.
Okay.
When I was going through divorce, my wife and I had to go to family court, which I wished we didn't have to, but I sat there listening to 4 other couples going through basically laying their dirty laundry. And it occurred to me that, wait a minute, if this is what causes divorce, shouldn't we reverse engineer that so we never get there? That's what the Gottmans have done. They have predicted where most failures in relationship occur, and then reinvent or connected the dots, reversed engineered it to say, well, this is what you can do to avoid this happening. It requires 2 people being intentional. And, women tend to be more that way. Women buy relationship books at, 9-fold greater than men, most likely. That's a prediction on my part. That's not a fact. Okay.
I've heard it.
Yeah. I mean, so if that's the case, women have a container of knowledge that the men don't. So then it becomes introducing it to a man. And Look, I jokingly say the following, ladies, you can sit in your feminine energy and hope to be claimed by a guy, but just recognize this. Most men are rather clueless. You are in charge of your relationship destiny. And quite frankly, you are the container to develop the emotional aspect of the relationship because you're better trained at it than we are.
Mm-hmm.
So don't be afraid to establish that standard and boundary for yourself, because the right guy is going to go, thank God, you just made my job easier. And men do want it easy. It's okay to be the emotional leader of the relationship. Mm-hmm. And yet most of you are afraid. So you accept casual, you accept crumbs in many cases, hoping that magic fairy dust will change a guy who does not have commitment on the forethought of his mind. And commitment is really these days, you either want to live together or get married. I'm not a Puritan, but I now recognize why marriage was so valuable, because men can string you along sexually. Like I said, dating has become a strung out version of friends with benefits. Okay, that's my rant. I'm curious to hear if you agree or disagree with me.
Well, so on the question of why might you be in a like a co-creative partnership?
Yeah.
Right? My imagination is that for a lot of people, if they're oriented towards growth,
yes,
the relationship is the best, fastest, and sometimes hardest, but kind of truest path for that, right? Like, I mean, I sometimes talk about the intractable domain, right? There's a lot of us have a domain, sometimes multiple domains of life that just seem kind of hard, right? For some people, it might be making money or finding home. It might be relationship. It might be health. But I know a lot of people who, their career is, there's ups and downs, but generally, they're happy with their career or they've got good things going on. The career is not going to teach them the same thing that actually coming into contact with another human being is, particularly when it comes to some of the stuff you're talking about, the inheritance of our childhoods, which we're all going to have in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
I guess I'm just curious if as many men are looking at it that way as women, as like, because I've seen both with clients and just in the marketplace a lot of profiles from women saying, look, I'm looking for basically an adventure travel buddy, right? Let's say I don't want kids, but I want an adventure travel buddy, and I want someone I can grow with. And that variation of someone I can grow with is quite a common way of women talking about what they're looking for in dating. And I'm curious, I haven't seen as many male dating profiles. I'm as curious if men are on that same page, that, hey, if we're not doing the family thing, or it's not the time of life now to do that, am I looking for someone to grow with? Am I looking for someone to help me be a better human being, make me more conscious? Because I have a suspicion that there might be slightly more women in that category who are like wanting to use the relationship to grow and be more conscious.
Yeah, I would say that while there is a significant percentage of women who have also gone through a divorce and they're less likely to grow with someone, I mean, or at least really fully commit to another person, there's a big percentage of that. Let me just share with you. And especially in the demographic that I talk to, in the 50, 60-year-old demographic, because they might be on a second marriage. And that's another factor to consider, is both how many times a person has been married or how many multiple relationships they've had. Because each relationship, your desire for commitment begins to become, can become, almost non-existent. Okay. With that said, though, I think genuinely speaking, women have a propensity to want commitment more so than men.
Yes.
Okay. And to grow with someone. Okay. But here's the thing, as I say in my videos, most men are good guys. They're just bad daters. They haven't had anyone really lead them in how to grow a relationship. So here's the bottom line is this: you need a man who's open to your way of thinking or your methodology. Okay. And a lot of women are scared because, we've been so indoctrinated, men are the leaders and women just have to accept a man's direction to some degree.
Yeah. So when you're saying your methodology, what do you mean by that?
Is that you take charge of your relationship destiny, particularly by being the emotional leader of the relationship. So it might look like, hey, I've got this thing called the book 8 Dates. It's a blueprint to help us grow as a couple? Are you interested in doing this with me? And a man might say, oh my God, therapy, I'm against all that, blah, blah, blah. Well, then you have a closed-minded person. So quickly you want to determine, are they open-minded or closed-minded?
Yeah, I hear that.
And
do you have any advice just on that, right? Let's say someone is listening to this and they are in a relationship with a man, right? But they want to do something like that. They want to, go to a seminar, get therapy, and the guy is being resistant. Do you have any tips to help a woman in that situation, other than perhaps, okay, this might be that it's not actually going to work out? Like that's an option.
We could use some of the terminology. I would feel so good if you do this for me, and believing that men want to please women, but if someone is resistant to it, doesn't matter how much you say it feels good for me to do this. If someone's resistant, then the question becomes, where is their resistance coming from? And maybe have a dialogue about where that resistance coming from. And maybe you had a childhood wound or a trauma or an adult trauma that has gone unhealed. And maybe, at some level, I think it's important to say, look, if you're not on the same page with me, I'm going to go find somebody who is on the same page with me, not be fearful. So I'm not saying you draw a line in the sand, but ultimately, look at women on average spend 5 years with the wrong guy. And this happens habitually. Mm-hmm. And I'm picking that number, slightly, but
I get it. So when I hear it, what you're saying is, in a sense, if there is significant resistance, probabilistically, what I hear you say is it's maybe not a good fit for you. Maybe you should start looking elsewhere, rather than perhaps here's the way that you enroll a guy. Like, you can explore what his fear is, right? Yeah. And maybe it is linked to some kind of trauma. Maybe for some guys, unless they've seen the value of therapy, they don't see the value of therapy. You know what I mean? Like they've got to have some kind of sense that it's either valuable or is going to help them or help the relationship.
Well, you can always accept the man the way he is, and just accept it and accept the relationship. But be careful if it's a dependent type of relationship, is certainly particularly when we think of it from a monetary perspective. But a lot of times women accept mediocre, and I'm characterizing that because it's better to have a mediocre relationship than no relationship at all.
Better than nothing. Yeah.
So I'm not a advocate for that by any stretch of the means, but I'm certainly understand why so many women will accept casual, because it's better. Life is better with company. The problem becomes, at any given moment, that person will leave, and then do you really look at? We also have to fear death too. Sometimes that's the catalyst for a relationship to end. Yeah, and I'm talking about for those of us that are in this age demographic. But ultimately, growth, in my opinion, is the fun part of the journey. By establishing. I dated a woman once. This is before I met my beloved, which my sweetheart and I devote 1 day a month to absolute, really a day and a half to really work on stuff in our relationship. Yeah. And we do it in a very spiritual way. And along with throughout the week, we do things, but there is a devoted day. Yeah. I dated a woman who did something called church. Instead of physically going to church, we listened to a personal development CD for an hour and a half, and then we talked about it. Well, that was personal development. What about a relationship, podcast? And talk about what was discussed and having a dialogue with someone. And, to me, rich dialogue with a partner is kind of the reason why I get up in the morning to spend with my beloved, because we have these deep, rich conversations and we both like each other.
Let me ask you this.
Sure.
So you've talked about this aspect of sort of dependency, and I think ultimately you're talking about financial dependency. Well, that's one important vector of it. Do you have any view about, let's say, a woman who doesn't need a guy to do that, but maybe still has some desire that the guy is pretty, not necessarily wealthy, but kind of financially set, responsible, showing up in that domain? Are you counseling people against getting into more mutually commingled, financially dependent relationship? Is there a sense that if that's not happening for some women, it might never feel quite as sort of full as a relationship where maybe that is happening. What do you think about that?
Well, let's just kind of look at the United States for a moment. Roughly 80% of the population makes less than $100,000 a year.
Yeah.
That's just, and roughly about 90% of the population have less than, they couldn't be out of work for 3 months without suffering a substantial financial, potential calamity. So, okay, so we know some of these facts to be true. The reality is most people aren't, we were talking about a podcast earlier where they talk about, athletes and ballers and stuff like that, the richest of the rich, and then the Kardashians. That's not the average person. The average person has a job making 50 grand, 75 grand a year. In my opinion, is 2 incomes is better than 1. Okay. So while you might seek someone to take care of you financially, that means you're going to have to be in a position to attract someone if that's the case. Or you can say 2 incomes is better than 1. And let's say you're a woman who made 75 grand a year and you're with a man who made 65 grand a year. Well, that's combined as 140 a year. If you're in a committed relationship with this person, if you live together, you can combine resources. The reality is while traditionally men have always had the opportunity to continually create resources, we're seeing a shift in that dramatically as people age. And so I think it's better to view it 2 is better than 1 and not from and so if you're a woman who has to come at it from a dependency stage, then you might have to settle have to settle in certain areas of your life. And and a lot of people don't want to settle, they want their cake and eat it too. This is women as well as men. Men want to have more physical attractiveness. Women tend to have more men with established resources. But I'm here to say 2 is better than 1.
So it sounds like because I haven't really put it in this language. It sounds like you're saying better than dependence is interdependence, and really what you're saying 2 is better than 1 is kind of like, we're gonna both put into the pot, but it's really more of an interdependent than one-way dependent kind of relationship.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we're probably coming to the sort of end of our time here. So just to tie us back to where we started, right? Women accept casual when they're looking for commitment, right? So let's say right now someone's listened to this, and if they're tuning into themselves, they're like, that probably does apply to me. Do you have any kind of message of support, hope? Like, what would you say to a person who's like, that's kind of happening for me right now?
Sure. And that's a great question. So I would venture, first and foremost, is certainly work on oneself, whether it's healing childhood wounds and traumas or adult traumas, so you can actually show up to be a full participant in relationship. Number 2, there are a lot of good men out there. There's a lot of good men out there. They're just bad at the dating process. So rather than judge men as with an expectation of being good at this, just accept that they're bad at it. Just like it's accepting that men want sex on a first date. Let's just call those givens, but not with no judgment. Okay. Your job as a woman, or at least my invitation for you, is to do a better job of weeding out, the wrong men sooner rather than later. Because that puts, like, even what I teach my coaching is my job is to put the odds in your favor, because we're dealing with a population that is rather dysfunctional to some degree, some more than others.
Wait, you mean the dating pool of men? Is that what
dating pool of men and women. Believe me, the dysfunctionality. I mean, there's people with clinical issues, there's people that are dysfunctional, and there's a range of that dysfunctionality. And then there's certainly men who are growers and builders that I talk about. Those that have that capacity. And there are plenty of men out there. Sometimes you have to be a little bit more patient at the same time having your standards. So I'm all about laying your cards on the table. If there's mutual physical attraction, then lay your cards on the table sooner rather than playing the game of not. Listen, a lot of people say dating should just have fun, just have a good time. It's all about having a good time. Well, here's the problem. You have a good time for too long without pre-qualifying that person, and then you're attached to someone, and then you find yourself 6 weeks later going, I just got dumped by a guy because I didn't do my job.
Yeah.
It's a job. And God, guess what? You may not like the job. You may despise the idea of a job, or you can say, you know what? Being strategic can be fun too.
Yeah.
And you can I'm not saying play it as a game, but
No,
just
saying be smart.
Yeah, be smart and just and always come at it from a place of gratitude and curiosity, and just go, I'm just going to be curious and open and see where it goes. And if it doesn't work out, that's okay too. But by doing this, you put the odds in your favor.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. Sounds like not being afraid to claim what it is that you're actually looking for.
Exactly.
To your point earlier, realizing that that probably will repel most men. Right?
Yeah.
You said 90%. Yeah, I get it. And actually learning how to tolerate that rather than tolerate the difficulty of starting to attach to someone who's not really available to be attached to.
Exactly. Well said, Jack.
So, yeah. Well, look, thanks so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom. If you want more of Jonathon, just look beneath this video. You'll be able to head over to his channel, check it out. And for everyone who's been here watching, appreciate it. Look forward to being with you again on the channel, and all the best with your dating. Thanks.
Thanks so much.